welcome Dr. Feroz. Dr. Feroz, you have the floor.
First, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be able to address the honorable MPs, the rest of the panel, and also the audiences. And I do understand that there are some diplomatic representation in the audiences as well, so do welcome. And thank you again for bearing with me with my my microphone inadequacies. So I would like to start with the fact of the situation we're in at the moment with regards to the concerns we have about minorities and the rights of Muslims and Tamils and all the other minorities in Sri Lanka. I'd like to address the whole panel and the audiences on three grounds. First, what Sri Lanka is and what everybody understands goes on in the background. We all know the 30-year-old war, and we all know every single group of people, whether they were Buddhist, Sinhalese, Tamils, Muslims, everybody suffered during that period. So we all understand the gravity of conflicts between the minorities or the majorities or a country as a whole. However, what we need to look at as how it stands with regards to the ground situation in Sri Lanka is how we can improve the qualities of living standards and peace and harmony between the communities from now going forward. I know there are a lot of issues which has been addressed as a trend within the country by the governments, various governments representing either their constitutions within it or as a country as a whole. But as how Mr. Afzal Khan pointed out, it's a beautiful country with beautiful talents. Sri Lanka is one of the standing democracies of South Asia, which has had numerous positives coming out of the democratic rule throughout the last at least 40, 50 decades. What we are concerned here, and the topic of discussion, is how the rights of the minorities are protected, or, for the question, not protected, and what we can do as the international body to enable that there are protections towards the minorities. Now, I have a long list of events to go through with regards to what has happened, especially to Tamils and Muslims, but I'm not here to talk about the events of all misfortunes and all the perpetrations of violence against Muslims. This is common knowledge. You open up the social media or the mainstream media, and everything's there, archived. We can all see that. However, what we expect from the country, what we expect from the government, is a forward move in terms of protecting minorities and minority rights, and making sure that everything within their powers to enable peace, enable harmony, and enable a system which protects the minorities. After all, the definition of democracy is the rule of the majority with the protection of the rights of the minorities. Just the first isn't enough to establish a peaceful country. So what we were focusing with regards to as a discussion point to take out of this side event is how we can analyze past incidences and procedures which is undertaken by the government or with the approval of the government, which could have avoided, so that we can prevent such undertakings which would impinge on minority rights. Now, COVID-19, the forced cremation, is a hot topic. There's a question about whether the topic has been resolved or not, which will come to it right at the end. However, there are other things which we are more concerned about, mainly those anti-minority forces within the country. We do understand in most of the countries, there are conflicts, there are conflicts of interest between the majorities and minorities and power holders and those who do not have power. This is the trend with politics. And also the ground situation within Sri Lanka is quite volatile, we know, because the country has just gone through a 30-year-old war. It's trying to lift its head up to face the international community, struggling within itself to bring up normality to people's life and those affected who are both sides of the war. And there is reasonable peace within the country, which should give credit to the group who actually made it possible to bring some peace into the island. However, it's important that that peace is impinged or dissected into a million pieces by certain legislations which doesn't look after the vulnerable group, which is the minorities. Now, the main focus of my statement is the anti-minority forces, namely the BBS and the Sinhala Urimaya, and all those forces which seems to have approval or support from power holders in a sense that there is no repercussion to the activities they take. And I cannot recall incidences where any of the named perpetrators who create these uneasiness within the communities, who dissect communities, who make their purpose to make the individuals or certain communities' life become hell purely because they are not able to tolerate harmony within the countries. Doesn't matter what name they bring up distortion to the peace, whether in the name of Buddhism. We all know Buddhism is one of the most peaceful religions. We know the teachings of Buddha, which in a fact, I read it once when I was in school, that as a devotee to Buddhism, you're supposed to look at the floor when you walk forward so that you do not step on a passing by ant. Now, we are talking about lives and harmony at many levels. From a religion as such, filled with peace and harmony, we allow certain people, certain group of people to go to the extreme end of violence and disharmony. And as a country, I believe the government, whether it is the current government or whatever the government come into power, has a responsibility to its citizens to make sure, regardless of which religious sect or which race they come in from, they have peace and they have the right as citizens. And this is what we wanted to see. We wanted the government very focused on development. It's very focused on improvement. It's very focused on traveling a positive direction in terms of its reputation and its development. But we do not see a hardwired system to secure the minority rights within. We do not find any concrete evidence or any concrete moves towards enabling the security and safety of the minorities. I'm not just talking for Muslims, I'm talking for all the minorities. I have to state here from my own experiences, we are talking about majorities, whether the Sinhalese, Buddhist or Buddhist. In my experiences of interaction with them, they are one of the most peaceful people. And I've never seen any aggression from that end. And I think even from the evidences we see, you have millions of tourists go to Sri Lanka and come back. All what we hear is they have never seen hospitality in that scale. There are very few countries foreigners would go and come back as tourists and say that they have had that level of inclusiveness and hospitality. Same thing was true between all the races before. We are talking about before 80s. However, in terms of the development into the country, I think this development, this human factor, this humanity spirit has to be bolted into the policies of the government to be able to secure the safety and the security and the peace to the minorities. It has to be one nation. It has to be one direction everybody travels. We are talking about the nationalism, the patriotism somebody would have to have, and that has to be earned in both ways. As a person who are born and they are discriminated or they are abused, in the name of a religion or a sect, doesn't naturally allow them from a psychological perspective for them to have any bonding to the land they live in or the people they rule. So it has to be a positive move from the government and the power holders to be able to harvest that out of every single citizen of every single country. And where does it start? Is it a chicken and an egg situation that the citizens have to show some level of patriotism before the governments and the rulers can give them the positive inclusiveness? No, it usually comes from top to bottom. So I think the government should, from its policies and procedures, it should try to include this part in it so that every single citizen feel that they are part of an inclusive, supportive system which comes from the government, from the head down, downwards. Now, the last, I don't want to take too much of time, but it is important to address the issue of cremation. In fact, I almost not going to address the cremation matter because I have to thank the government, and we have to give credit that they were able to consider an option as burial for the Muslim and Christian Catholic communities if they wish to bury their dead who were suspected or confirmed of COVID-19. But it's not quite the same that they are agreeing or they are passing a bill to bury the dead, yet do not make that bill to be practically feasible or practically implementable. Because we all hear now that the bill is passed, they will allow COVID-19 dead bodies to be buried, but it's not a straightforward thing. There's a lot of strings attached, and there's certainly a big leash stuck to that, where now a situation has come that it has to be buried in a remote island, which is some 300 kilometers away from Colombo itself. Let's not calculate the distance from Galle, which is south of Sri Lanka. And then you need to go through certain procedures and policies, which I fully understand has to be compliant with infection control. And then it is only allowed to be buried in this remote village with roughly about 100 to 200 families. And the biggest worry here is this is a village far in the northwest of Sri Lanka. It is populated by a largely Catholic communities, and also it's Tamil speaking. Now that is going to create a huge issue, number one, between the religious communities, because majority of those who want to be buried are Muslims. And number two is that it's going to be a Tamil community, a Tamil speaking community, who will inevitably look at this situation as a problem of Muslims, because Muslims are the majorities who want their body to be buried. Now, there's a lot of complications behind it. Let's just look at it at a macro level. Now, we know there are so many countries in the world who allow burial of bodies. I'm just talking from the United Kingdom perspective. We don't have a problem. The COVID-19 infected bodies are buried according to the infection control regulations. So long as it meets the criteria, it doesn't even have to be a special undertaker who is conducting this burial, so long as they comply to the infection control. Now, it's buried in the same burial ground. There is no special burial ground. There are no special coating of the grave. So long as they're in a body bag, they're allowed to be buried. Why is it? Why is it so many developed countries who actually are very, very stringent in looking into the microscopic element of risk to the environment, the ecosystem, and also to the living organism around it, will allow the burial of these bodies, compared to a country which is insistent in not burying it for almost a year, and then they agreed to bury the body with so many conditions. If you look at every single conditions put forward to, it's almost impossible for a person, especially if they are poor, to be able to carry this body all the way to this village, to this island called Ironetivu, and bury it. It's impossible. So why is the law, or why is the system favoring the able to the one who are less able? Why are we putting a system in place which makes it almost impossible for somebody to follow because of practical limitations to it? Going back into the original issue is, why was the COVID-19, the forced cremation matter was implemented and held as viable until this time? Because of apparent scientific reason. And let me tell you, I was part of a panel who looked into the scientific evidences of any risks to the ecosystem. And we found that there were about 36 scientific material available on reliable scientific resources, things like PubMed and Lancet. And out of that 36, and they haven't mainly looked into the COVID-19, which is SARS-CoV-2 virus, because it's such a new virus known to all of us. So there is not enough evidence that we have actually gathered to be able to put it into something like a systemic review. However, they belong to a group of viruses called coronavirus, and they are encapsulated viruses. I don't want to go into the details. You must have heard of this a million times in WhatsApp and Facebook. So just to bring a very important, a salient point here to everybody's note, anybody who's got a scientific background, whether it is the technical committee or the individual hydrologists who supported the notion of banning the burial of COVID-19, I can reassure you, in fact, I can actually have a discussion with any individuals regarding this, with the evidences we have. We are talking about scientific, verifiable evidence. These are not anecdotal evidences. None of them says any of the coronavirus is viable, is able to replicate once its external capsule is broken. And that happens very readily because it's fragile. It's a polypeptide capsule. I do not want to go into the scientific details because the nature of this discussion. However, it's important to make sure that I re-emphasize the fact that there isn't a single scientific evidence to prove a coronavirus or viruses of the class belonging to corona could come out of the body, survive in the soil, in the changing pH, the acidity of the soil, and go through into the water system, to the drain system or through the water system, go into a water reserve, survive there months and months and months, and get into an organism, we're talking about a human, and then it infects. The very nature of the infectivity of this virus disputes the fact that it is contagious when the body is buried in the grave. And this is a scientific fact which had been absolutely available for everybody's knowledge and their review since the day the coronavirus came, when we find out on the 13th of January. But yet the technical committee insisted that there was no convincing evidence to allow the burial, despite the fact even the WHO, World Health Organization, was insisting that it was safe to bury this body, and the government did not give consideration to the international knowledge we had. And I would personally question the evidence put forward by the technical committee, but that's a different debate and a discussion on this matter. However, going to the pure conclusion of this, as a democratic government, as a government which should take responsibility of the safeguard of the minorities. Remember, it's not just the physical insult which matters to people, it's the psychological impact. As a group of civilians, we are talking about the citizens of Sri Lanka being Muslim. I'm just particularly talking about Muslim and Catholics here. They would have a lifelong scar from those cremations occurred to their families and loved ones, which they will not be able to grieve for the rest of their life. Who is responsible for causing these scars in their psychological footprints? It is the people who are responsible of implementing that law. Now, I know there had been misinformation spread among the citizens of Sri Lanka who would eventually support the notion that the burial will not be allowed, but there was a responsibility of the government or the bodies who had the power to increase awareness of coronavirus and also any scientific facts which they may find it convincing to the rest of the population. We come out and say how dangerous the coronavirus is. We go out on a rampage of telling people that how careful they should be and all that infection control measures. Why aren't we slotting in this part of the fact which says coronavirus is not as contagious in a dead body than a live body? Now, this is an evidence you can produce tomorrow. If the technical committee want to come out and find evidence to say that it is safer to bury this body, they would have. So it raises the concern that there are other agenda behind why the burial was not allowed. So these are the thoughts I would want to bring it to the minds of the attendees and the panelists, just to emphasize the fact that if, as a government, you wanted to bring peace, you wanted to bring communities, you take proactive measures to be able to increase their cohesion, to be able to bring understanding between the communities so that the communities bond between each other, and that as a resultant positive effect help the country move forward.